Insight into all these developments. We welcome to studio Dan Perry, International Affairs Analyst and former Europe Editor at the Associated Press. Thank you so much, Dan, for being here in studio. So it's almost 1 year since the start of the Russian invasion, coming up on Friday. The special operation, it's still being called that, by Vladimir Putin. Your take on the message we heard from the Russian president right now, speaking in Moscow on this day. He says this is all Ukraine's fault, all the West's fault.
The basic story is that both sides are sticking to their narrative, so Putin's not backing down. It's a highly combustible situation here. We're dealing with a dictator whose life is probably in danger, who took a tremendous gamble that brought his own people unbelievable damage, and who doesn't have a visible way to climb down from the situation that he has created. So the things he said today, on one hand, do appear to continue his status as the only leader since the onset of the nuclear age to actively threaten on the nuclear front. But in another way, it's actually less disturbing than his previous direct threats to use nuclear weapons. To suspend the START treaty is not to walk away from the START treaty. It is largely declarative. And I have to say, he surely felt he had to do something when you have Russian bloggers in Moscow risking his ire by calling what happened yesterday a humiliation. And indeed, the messaging by Biden was rather brilliant. You have here the elderly U.S. president who everyone thought would be too weak-kneed and too reasonable to really face down the Russian dictator, who actually gets on a train and secretly goes off to a war zone to appear in public with Zelensky. So Putin's clearly feeling the heat.
Antony Blinken says this move over the treaty is unfortunate and it's deeply irresponsible. You're saying it's not as harsh as what we've heard from him in the past, but how worrying is this right now, not only for Antony Blinken, for the US, but also for all those NATO allies on the eastern flank who are watching very keenly to see exactly what unfolds out of Russia?
Well, indeed, if he starts manufacturing more nuclear weapons or moving them into areas that the treaty would have prevented it from doing, then that obviously could escalate very badly. And I think it's no coincidence that Biden is in Poland today. Remember that Poland has the longest border with Russia. Poland is bearing the brunt of refugees coming from Ukraine and Russia, and also for weapons being transferred in. So Poland's a very big player, and I have to say, not much discussed, but relevant, I think, also is the fact that by being so closely aligned with the democratic Western effort to back Ukraine, Poland is perhaps easing away from its membership in the axis of the deplorable that they share with Hungary, with Turkey, and in a way with Russia itself.
When we know that President Joe Biden is about to speak very shortly, in fact, from the Warsaw Royal Castle, we know the speech he made just weeks into the start of the war, how he spoke about Vladimir Putin, the message he gave to the West and to Europe. Talk to us about what he needs to say right now, over and above thanking Poland and allies for standing steadfast and supporting Ukraine the way they have.
I think it has to make sure that the people of Europe continue to be willing to sacrifice a little bit for what is happening here, obviously on the energy side, that the nations of NATO understand that the U.S., as the leader of NATO, will continue to do everything it can to make sure that Ukraine can defend itself, not necessarily attack Russia, but defend itself. And perhaps the main message is to Putin and to the Russian people. And I think Biden would be well advised to simply list the damage that the war has brought to Russia, from its removal as a good faith player in the world to the elimination of its ability to blackmail Europe and the West with energy, to the resulting harm to its economy, to Putin's own inability to travel around the world, and of course the tremendous damage to life caused to Russia itself. Probably 100,000 troops have died. It is not necessarily so that dictators can forever bamboozle and oppress their own people. There is a point where the pressure from inside becomes too great. And we don't know that much about what's happening in Russian public opinion, but it's reasonable to suspect that moment is coming closer.
And also at the start of the invasion, there were many experts predicting this would all last a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of months. We are now coming up, as we've been discussing, to 1 year on Friday. Dan Perry, international affairs analyst, always appreciate your insights. Lots more to discuss as we watch how things unfold in the coming days ahead of Friday, the anniversary of the start of the Russian invasion or special operation in Ukraine. Thank you very much.